You are such good social animals. You picked up on the cues that it was starting to begin. The rumble in the room just dropped off. It went from talking to not. Welcome, I'm Dr. Frank Connor. I'm the chair of the psychology department. I want to welcome you to the 6th annual psychology department speaker series. The second speaker in this year's series, I'll talk about the last two at the end of today's presentation, but right now we want to get straight to today's presentation. We have with us today Dave Kampfschulte. Dave is director of Amazing Circles Workshop, and David has his undergraduate degree from Michigan State University, and his graduate degree is from Grand Valley State University. Please welcome today's speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. And what Frank left out was I also was at junior college in 1972. I left here, so it's nice to be back. Now, there's a couple things you should know about me right off the bat. Number one, I'm a morning person. How many people here are morning people? Oh, good, good. My problem is I'm a morning person all day long. And when I was at Michigan State, I used to have people request in the dorm that I don't have breakfast with them because I was too cheerful. And so I'm walking down the cafeteria, and I can't eat with them, I can't eat with them. I see a young lady sitting by herself at 6:45 in the morning, and I pop myself down next to her, and I go, hey, mind if I sit here and have breakfast with you? She has her Michigan State newspaper, and she's like this, and she goes, you can sit here. I'm probably not going to talk to you. I said, she needs me. I found my purpose in life. I have found my purpose in life. Plus, she didn't get up and leave right away, so I figured there was a little kernel that she must like me. And today, 40 years later, she talked to me this morning. So you just never know how these things come out. I have had a career in education. I taught in the public school systems here in Grand Rapids and Forest Hills and East Grand Rapids. And along that, I've had a parallel career, too, in hospice. I've been a hospice volunteer for 27 years. And when I retired from teaching 6 years ago, these paths kind of merged together, and I formed my own business, Amazing Circles Workshops, and I do a lot of training, speakings. I've written a couple books. One of them I'm dying to talk with you, which is the title today of today's talk. So that's a little bit about my background. I've got good news and I've got bad news. What do you want to hear first? The good. You want to hear the good news? Tell me your name. Kyle. Kyle, you, me, and most people in this room are going to die a death that's going to take place over time. And we're going to know this happening. And we have some choices that we can make as far as our end of life goes. And if we choose to think about this and make those choices, we may want to be in a spot where we want to be. The bad news, that's the good news. Yeah, I try to find good, death, you got to find good news in something, And the bad news is basically the same thing. You, I, most people in this room are going to die a death that's going to take place over time. 100 years ago, childbirth, infection, and accidents were the three leading causes of death. Today it's cancer, heart disease, and what they're now calling just old age, the dwindles. And so if we choose not to make those decisions, we may not be in a spot where we want to be in, and we may be faced with some situations we may not want to be in. As one person said to me, she said, sooner or later there's going to be a discussion about your end of life. Do you want to be part of it? That really rang true to me. Do I want to be part of this discussion? Or do I want just things to take over, somebody to take over for me? And there's a great book out there, Susan Jacoby, she wrote it. It says, Never Say Die. If you ever get a chance to read it, I strongly recommend it. And in that book, she said there's 4 areas at end of life that we all are going to fall into. The first area is, do everything medically possible for me till the day I die. That's easy because that's our medical default system. If you and I walk into the emergency room today with some kind of event, they're going to do everything they're going to do to keep us alive unless they have some written instructions to the contrary. The second area is, do everything medically possible for me until I can no longer make a decision by myself. Even though we've never had this conversation, you'll magically know what I want, and you'll make those decisions for me. Magical thinking. It's a great way to go sometimes. The third one is, plan ahead. Have an advanced care plan. Have a patient advocate. Make some decisions about my future care. If I want a DNR, if I want to keep going, if I have a reasonable chance, yeah, let me keep going. If I don't have a reasonable chance, let me die naturally. And the fourth area is to artificially hasten death through some types of mean of active suicide. So think about that for a minute. If somebody were to ask you today, where would you fall in those 4 areas? Where would you fall? Because there's no right or wrong answer to this. But the problem, what I want you to do is think today about, yes, I do have choices. B, I may not die for a while, but other people are going to be dying around me, and how can I help initiate conversations with them about their end of life? Because death is a really scary subject for so many of us. We just don't want to talk about it. But it's important to talk about, because if you talk about it, the third thing is today is how do you plan ahead? What plans can I make to help me in my end-of-life decision making? So where we fall in those 4 categories, to me, it depends on how I look at life. And to me, I look at life 2 ways. 1, life is a line. It goes right across this room. I'm born, I go to school, I get out of school, I get a job, maybe I get married, maybe I have kids, I retire, and over there on Fulton Street, so far away I can't even see it, is death. You know what? If I can't see it, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think about it at all. The title of this talk is I'm Dying to Talk with You. I got a call once from somebody who says, Dave, I don't know whether to come to the talk that says I'm dying to talk with you, or I want to talk with you. I said, I don't have a talk I want to talk with you. So I called up the organization that hired me, and I said, I think there's been a typo. And they said, no, there's no typo. We left out the word death on purpose. We didn't think anybody would come. So thanks for coming today. And also our medical community has something to do with that. You think about all the things that I can get replaced. You can get a new elbow, new knee, new hip, whatever. I'm looking for some hair if anybody's got some spare hair. And you think, I can just keep on going. I can just go in get my oil changed, my car, my timing belt changed, and keep on going. Well, you can get new parts, but sooner or later, we're all going to die. And as Woody Allen summed it up so well, he said, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be here when it happens. The other way I look at life is the circle of life. Life is a never-ending circle. Back on the farms 100 years ago, where a lot of people lived, it was just in your face all day long. People came and went. I was born, you went through all those steps. The crops had seasons, animals had seasons, people had seasons. A lot of you are younger, but the older people, you remember the show called The Waltons? Who lived on the farm with the Waltons? Grandparents. Grandma and Grandpa Walton lived on the farm, and they died there too. It was just part of everyday life. How many people here remember a story about somebody being laid out at a home when they died? Does anybody remember? Look at that, the hands that went up. Wow, I'm impressed. What was the name of that room where people were laid out at home? The parlor. Oh, you are so good. You know that? Yeah, the parlor. Now, what do we call that room today? The living room. Now, interesting, politics isn't the only place where we spin things, okay? We've taken this dead person out of the home, we put them over here in the funeral parlor, and now we're going to call this room and rename it the living room. Once again, death is one more step removed. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to deal with it. My dad told me the story when the 1918 flu epidemic, his 2 twin cousins died, and my dad's family had all the visitations were at their house because, one, they had a picture window where they could put the coffin inside, and they had a porch with 2 steps. People could come up and look at the coffin and come down the other side. It was just part of everyday life. It doesn't happen that way anymore. There's a great movie out there called Departures. Has anybody seen it? Nobody's seen it? It's a Japanese foreign film. Strongly recommend you see it. This guy answers an ad in the paper, and he thinks it's for a travel agency. And he reports to work, and it's an older guy who dresses bodies in the old traditional Japanese way with the family there when they die, and he becomes his apprentice. And it's a wonderful movie. Not to be confused with a movie called The Departed, which has Jack Nicholson. It's a gangster film. Also deals with a lot of death, but not the kind of death we're talking about today. So I got a couple stories that kind of highlight the 2 different life views here. Number 1, I had a friend of mine who battled breast cancer for 15 years. It was a constant roller coaster, in and out of remission. And the last time it came back, the doctor said to her, there's nothing more we can medically do for you. I recommend you get your affairs in order. So a couple days later, I went to visit her, and I said to her, because I knew this conversation had taken place, I said, I understand the doctor said you have limited time. How would you like to spend that time? And she did not hesitate. She said, I want to get better. And I thought, oh, I'm kind of up against a little bit of a brick wall here. So I said, if you can't get better, how would you like to spend your time? She goes, I want to get better. And I said, she's in a complete denial at this moment about her impending death, and it's not my role to do anything different other than to encourage her and help her and support her. Her husband called me that night and said, Dave, thanks a lot for coming over. We know you're in hospice. Please don't mention the word hospice with her because she's not there yet and I'm not there yet. So I didn't. A week later, my friend ends up in the hospital, the last place that she wanted to be. And she's dying. And she's gathered her family around her. I happened to be there that day. And she said, listen to me very carefully. I waited too long to acknowledge that I'm dying. I'm here where I don't want to be. I can't be at home anymore. Don't make the same mistake that I just made. And then she died that night. But how sad. Because, you know, she just, once again, all her life, the last 15 years, she's been battling this thing, and that's all that she knew. The circle of life involves one of my dad, Mel Kampfschulte. Mel Kampfschulte had advanced, he smoked non-filtered Camels and Chesterfields all his adult life, and he was dying of emphysema. I just met a guy at a presentation last week, and he says, I remember your dad. I used to work with him. He came up to me. He says he was one of the finest men I ever knew. And the other thing he said, I still remember him sitting at his desk sucking that cigarette for everything it was worth to get that last bit of nicotine out of it. But he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, Mel, there's nothing more we can do for you. I recommend you get your affairs in order. So I came home. I said, Dad, I just heard what the doctor said. How would you like to spend your remaining days? Same question I used before. And he didn't hesitate either. He said, I don't want to die in a nursing home. I don't want to die in a hospital. I want to die in my own house. And I said, Dad, thanks a lot. We've never really talked about this before. And this really helps me clarify what I need to do because we need to have a plan. And you've always taught us to have a plan. My dad had every minute of his life planned out. He's one of these people. And I said, from my hospice experience, when things start to go south, it's not like this. You hit a tipping point, and it goes like that. And if you don't have a plan, then we're just reacting, and you're going to end up in a hospital because things are going to get out of control in a hurry. And part of that plan really needs to involve hospice. Hospice will come in and help you die at home. And I can answer a lot of those questions, but somebody from hospice should come in here and help you too. I'll tell you what, why don't we have hospice come in? They can answer your questions. They can enroll you, get you involved, and then they can walk away. When we need them, we'll call them because right now you're pretty good. And he thought about it. I said, and my dad always never made snap decisions. If there was a sale at a store, he'd go in, or if there's something to buy, he'd look at the table, he'd say, is this going to be on sale next week? Would you take $1 less for this? You know, if I offer you $1 at closing time today, $1 less? I mean, he's always trying to play the system a little bit. So he thought about it, called me up that night, and said, Dave, I think this is a good idea. Let's have hospice come in. Hospice came. They did their thing. They left. A week later, he lives in a 2-story house. He's going up the stairs with me. He goes, Dave, I think it's time for hospice. He could hardly breathe. I called hospice. The next morning, they were over with the bed. We had the TV room cleared out in the back because it was on the main floor. And they brought in all the equipment, and the nurse was there, and boom, he got down in that bed. And I'll never forget the words that he said. He said, he says, this feels so good. I'm so tired. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard people say to me, I'm so tired. My dad was a child of depression, World War II, and all he did was put one foot in front of the other to keep on going like that's all he ever knew. And the minute he put down that bed and said, I'm so tired, I said, he just gave himself permission to die. And that's pretty big for people to do that. And I said to myself, this is going to go really quick. And then this was on a Thursday. On the next day, my nephews came over. They were all adults. And he said, Mike, he says, you know that bottle of whiskey you got me for Christmas last year? I think this is a good time to open it up. He'd wait. And they all had a drink with Grandpa. The next day, the priest comes in from the church. And Father John Nadowski was his name. I'll never forget him. He goes, Melvin! He says, it's Father John. My dad was unconscious at this point, and he kind of wakes up. I don't know if he thought he was in heaven and the Lord was talking to him or what. And so they had their talk. Father John gave him the last rites. And afterwards I said, why did you talk so loud? He says, well, because I find that most of my clients, I have one foot in the other world and one foot in this world. So I got to bring them back a little bit. Learn that one. So and then my sister came on the plane from Alabama, and he died the next morning. It was amazing. And my mom was just flabbergasted. She said, I thought this was going to go on forever. That we're going to, 3-4 months, and we have people over, we look at family albums and things like that. But as soon as he said, I'm so tired, this feels so good, I said he was going to go. So when I talk to people about conversations I have with them regarding end of life, so often I only get a little bit of a tidbit. And it's important for me to get more from that. And Amber, this is where you come on, okay? I met Amber at lunch today, and she has so graciously volunteered. I don't even have to pay you, I would have paid you if you'd hold out, okay? Amber, metaphorically speaking, how do you see your personality? Do you see it as a window, or do you see yourself as a door? A window. And why would you say that? Door closed off. Lauren has also graciously volunteered. Are you ready, Lauren? You don't get the same one. I know you have an answer for that. Metaphorically speaking, Lauren, do you see yourself as a candle or as a flashlight? Oh, you're very definite with that. Why do you say that? Okay, great. Thanks. That wasn't bad, was it? I told you that wasn't going to be bad. Now, the rest of you don't get off the hook. When Amber said window and Lauren said candle, what was the next word out of my mouth? What was the next word out of my mouth? Why? Why do you see yourself as a window? I could look at you all day long and guess, but I'm not going to know until I ask you that question. And so often people just give us a little bit. Paul Harvey is the perfect metaphor for this. How many people have never heard of Paul Harvey? Raise your hand. All right, you're going to learn something today. You're going to learn. You're going to walk away. When they say you go back to class, psychology class, what did you learn? I learned who Paul Harvey was. Paul Harvey came out of Chicago. He was a news broadcaster every day at noon. He'd come to the first half. He'd go to commercial break. He'd come back and he'd say, page 2. And then what were the next words out of his mouth? Now for the rest of the story. And that's what I'm always looking for when I'm having conversations with people, the rest of the story. A, death is really scary to talk about, so they're just going to give minimal answers to it. And B, we're so programmed to taking tests where we just fill in A, B, C, D, multiple choice, true, false. We never really have to explain our answers. So I'm always asking why and because. You're going to hear that a lot from me today. And I really sincerely hope that you adapt that into part of your conversation with people too, trying to get the rest of the story. Now, my 2 examples I gave earlier, my dad and my friend, I said to both of them, I said the same exact thing. How would you like to spend the rest of your days? My friend decided to tread water a little bit more and not catch the line that I threw to her. My dad grabbed that line and pulled it in, and he was able to do what he wanted to do as far as his end of life goes. What would you have done if you were in that same situation? And everybody's situation, I realize, is different. But it's important to think, what would I do if that was the situation? The other thing, so when I'm talking to people, it's really important for me to observe what they're hearing, what they're saying, and how they're acting. If you ask me how I'm doing today, what am I going to answer? Fine. Good. I can't take credit for it, but I love this. FINE is an acronym. It's for feelings inside, not expressed. Don't you love that? Feelings inside, not expressed. And how true that is. You try this with your friends sometimes. They come up to you, how you doing today? Don't say good or fine. Tell them exactly how you're feeling. Like I'll usually answer, I'm excited. And they go, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. If I say, I'm feeling kind of sad today, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get out of here before. The mouth just drops and everything else. So feelings inside. I'll give you an example. I had a hospice patient one time. And this man was the most mellow person in the world. He just sat in his chair and just chilled out and had great conversations. And one night I got there and he was just antsy. He was just moving around like this. And so I said to him, Wilbur, it looks like to me that you're a little bit anxious here tonight. What's on your mind? He said, you're right, I am anxious. I said, well, tell me. He said, you don't know this, but I've been married twice before. And both of my wives have died. I know I'm going to die pretty soon because I am in hospice. And when I do die and I go to heaven, just like you, I was laughing inside. But for him, this was important business. And so it's important to keep a poker face in this situation. And there's a quote that I love, comes to mind, it helps me in situations like this. The human soul doesn't want to be fixed, it just wants to be heard. And how true that is. He knew what he wanted. He knew what was going to happen. He just had to kind of work it through it. He was exhibiting his anxiousness. So often, 70% of conversations are nonverbal. And so it's important for me. If you ask me, Dave, how am I doing today? I go, fine. Well, you're saying there's a disconnect here. Dave's saying fine out of his mouth, but he's going like this with his hands. Something's not going on. So it's important for you to say, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm feeling. And to give you an example of that, my dad's younger sister, Margaret, had advanced congestive heart failure, and she was at a rehab hospital here in town, and her kids both lived out of state. And I called them up. I said, would you like me to sit in on the staff meetings? They said, thank you. Would you please do that? We can't be there. We feel really cut off. So I went to the staff meeting, and the staff person said, Margaret, if you can just walk around the hallway 5 more laps. Margaret, if you can be on the treadmill for 10 more minutes. Margaret, if you can just eat more for dinner, we can get you back to your apartment. You know what Margaret said? I'm so tired. You guys are good. I'm so tired, and I missed it. I thought she had a bad night's sleep. The staff people thought she had a bad night's sleep. And I went home, I said, you look at me today, you say, boy, this Kampfschulte guy, I wouldn't want to have breakfast with him at 6:45 anymore. He's a little too energetic. Well, my aunt was like 10 scales above me, okay? I had never heard her be down in her life before or anything. And I said, that's kind of a disconnect for me. And after dinner that night, I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to go back and find out what's going on. Something is not adding up for me. And it was 8 o'clock at night. She's in her nightgown. She's got her rosary out all set to say prayers for bed and everything. And she goes, Dave, what are you doing? It's nighttime. It's bedtime. And I said, Margaret, I heard you say today that you were so tired. What did you mean by that? And her head was kind of down, and she says, I am tired. She says, I don't want to fight anymore. And I said, you don't have to fight. It's your choice. And her head just shot right up. She goes, I don't? And I said, no. You think of you're 90 years old. Think of all the list of medical problems that you've had in your life and you overcome. You get to call the shots of what you want to do. And then I said to her, have you ever had a doctor talk to you about your long-term prognosis? And she says, can I do that? And your heart just bleeds because she's that generation that if you had a white coat on, you didn't ask questions, you don't make waves, you just go and do what they tell you to. I said, you bet. We can get you somebody in here. The next morning, the doctor came in. And he said, Margaret, you have advanced heart failure, and there's nothing more medically we can do for you. Which I appreciate him being straight up. But then he went the next step, and he said, I realize both your kids are out of state. I would recommend hospice care, but you need a primary caregiver to be in hospice care, but there's an in-house facility here we can get you into. And we got her into the in-house facility. The guy was I appreciate today what he did for her. 3 days later, we're walking down the hall, and she's looking at the rooms that she's going by. And people are unconscious or they're in bed, and she's walking around. She says, I don't belong here. And I said, yes, you do. Trust me, you do. So she says, well, as long as I'm going to be here, for the last 25 years, with all this heart medication I've been taking, I have not been able to drink my Southern Comfort Manhattans. Do you notice a trend in our family? It's the important events that count. And so I said, you bet. She says, can you get me a flask? I said, you bet. We got the flask. We got the courage board out. The nephews and nieces came in and took turns playing with her. And one day, the priest comes in to give her communion. And right before then, she had said to me, I don't know if there's an afterlife or there's a way of contacting you. If there is, I'll make sure I do that if I can. My mom said the same thing to me. I've never heard from her, but you just never know. And so the priest comes to give communion. We walk out in the hallway. We come back in, and she's unconscious. And 10 minutes later, she dies. In that 10-minute span, I said to my sister, unplug the phone so we don't get interrupted during this last few minutes of her life. And just the minute she took her last breath, the phone rang. I said, Sally, I thought you were supposed to unplug the phone. Well, Sally did not unplug it from the wall. She unplugged the receiver from the thing. But I thought maybe she was contacting us from the other world. You just never know these stories. But here's my question to you. And please feel free to ask me questions as I get going, too. I see myself as just, trying to realize you got a lot of questions. You got one? Raise your hand. My dad and his sister, which category did they fall into? Did they plan ahead? Or did they say, do everything medically possible for me? Which category do you think they fell into? Do everything medically possible. Most people say the plan ahead, Lauren. But you're absolutely right. They would have gone down that path of ending up in the hospital, except for the fact that I happened to ask them, how would you like to spend your remaining time? Or what did you mean when you said you were so tired? And I have found through my 27 years of experience, most people know what they want. They just can't start the conversation. And so it takes me or you, anybody in this room, to invite them into the conversation. And they can then articulate what it is that they want. And just like Wilbur. Wilbur, you look a little anxious tonight. He had this on his mind a long time. And it was me inviting him in the conversation. When I first started off, when I graduated from Michigan State in 1974, I went through crisis phone line training here in town, a place called Switchboard. And at that point, people would call you up on the phone and tell you their problems. And I thought, well, when I got into hospice work, it's going to be the same thing. People are just going to spontaneously tell me what's on their mind. It doesn't work that way. It takes me saying, I'm hearing, I'm feeling, I'm seeing, inviting them into the conversation, and then they come in. So that's important. Part of this whole experience, 70% of people, if you've asked them, where do you want to die? 70% will say, I want to die at home. However, today, only 30 to 35% of the population actually does die at home. And so where's the disconnect? Why is that a problem for people to get there? And part of that has to do with hospice, because you're die at home, you're going to have hospice care. What do you think might be some roadblocks of why people don't think ahead, plan ahead? Yes, ma'am.
People don't have family around them like they used to.
Okay.
And so staying at home is not an option.
You need a primary caregiver with hospice, and so that family, extended family, is definitely a roadblock. Yes, sir. Finances really, as far as hospice goes, hospice care is going to be totally free. Every insurance has a rider because it's $100 to have hospice in a house. To stay in a hospital, it's thousands of dollars. Okay? What else might be some roadblocks? Yes? Different that they want to do. Dad or mom may want to say, I want to die at home, I want to die naturally, I'm okay with dying. And the kids are thinking, no, we got to do everything here to keep you going. And I've run into that time and time again. It's almost always the younger family members want to keep it going. The older families remember, like my aunt, I'm tired, I want to go. Any other roadblocks? Terry?
Once you're in the hospital, if you want to go home, you run the risk of how severe is it? You may die on the way. And that's not what we, in the ambulance.
Okay.
You have to evaluate
How
how severe.
severe?
Critical right then.
Okay, all right. And lots of times that has to do how far along you are and whether, where you are in that stage. Thank you. Anything else? Yes? Freak accidents. Yeah, you're all saying today, the students here in the crowd are probably thinking, I'm not going to die for another 50, 60 years. I sure hope Dave has an advanced care plan. He's looking pretty old up here. But terminal illness is one side of the coin. The other side of that coin are accidents, events, neurologically damaged, where I'm now on a respirator, and I'm 30 years old. Karen Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan, Terry Shivo were all young women in their 20s and 30s, and they ended up on artificial life support. And they were in a persistent vegetable state. So it's not just terminal illness. Any other roadblocks that you can think of? Yes? Tell me about that. Okay? They're kind of their bucket list a little bit. They want to keep going. And there's a mind, body, spirit we're going to talk about a little bit that definitely plays a role in that too. Any other thoughts? I got one for you. I got a call from my mother-in-law one day. She goes, Dave. She goes, can I talk to you? I said, yeah, Lynn, you can talk to me. Where are you? She goes, I'm in the backyard. This is before cell phones. You can see the cord coming out the slider. She's underneath the tree, and I said, why are you in the backyard? She goes, your father-in-law, he has the big C. I said, he has cancer? Yes. I said, does he know he has cancer? Yes. I said, well, go get him on the speakerphone and go back inside and let's talk. Well, come to find out, you know, when you're overwhelmed, you go down the path of irrationality in a hurry. She thought if she mentioned the word cancer, he was going to die sooner. Okay, I know it's ridiculous to look at it rational mind, but she wasn't thinking very rationally there. So I started talking with him, and he said that he'd been to the doctor. He has stage 4 kidney cancer. And I said, well, it sounds like that we should think about hospice here. And she butted in real quickly. No, it's not time for hospice yet. What's the next word on my mouth? Look at you, guy. Why? Because, she goes, because he's not in any pain yet. What's the next word on my mouth? Yeah, help me to understand where this is all. It was a double why situation. That doesn't happen very often. And come to find out, as she told her story, and everybody has a story, I've come to find out, her sister was dying. She did not go into hospice care until she was in pain. So therefore, my mother-in-law, everybody had to be in pain to go into hospice. You got to go ask those whys about that. Any other thoughts? When the newspaper used, yes? Yeah. Before that, you know, years ago, that probably would have just killed him right off the bat. And now, you know, he was kept alive, and they were able to do some diagnostic things. And yeah, they didn't know he was dying. Yes, sir.
Sorry, my grandfather went into the hospital. He wasn't sick, but he got like an infection, and that's what actually killed him. And so that's why they wanted, because hospitals can sometimes give infections.
You can get infections in hospitals. That's right. That's right. When the newspaper came to our house, I'd go for the sports page. My mom would go for the front page. My dad would go for the obituaries. He was a lifelong resident of Grand Rapids. He knew a lot of people. It was important for him to say goodbye. I'll never forget, Dorothy, we got to go over to Alt's tonight to say goodbye to so-and-so. And when my dad went to the funeral home, it wasn't, oh, I'm sorry for your loss. You know, he was a great guy, and walk out the door. He'd stay for an hour, hour and a half and tell stories about this person and the relationship that they had, and they were always humorous stories. That was my dad's calling card, and you could hear people laughing at the funeral home and go, what is going on here? When he died, people came to his wake, and they said, we sure enjoyed having your dad at our funeral home visitations. He made life so much better for us with that. So it was important for him to say goodbye. Picture with me the obituary. Dave, age 84, dies. What's the next line that you might see in an obituary? Well, he left behind somebody, but died what? Died
Unexpectedly.
after,
A lingering
oh, not just a lingering illness, but a,
battle.
what kind of battle?
Long.
Courageous battle. After a long, courageous battle with cancer. You normally see this for cancer. You don't normally see it like for anything else, like heart failure. And the reason why, do you know why? You're about to learn two things today. We declared war on cancer in 1971. Okay, President Nixon declared war. And if you have a war, you need warriors. And you want people to have that, you know, I want that in my obituary. He fought a long, courageous battle. I have all the respect for anybody here who's ever had anybody in their family or yourself who's dealt with cancer. It's taking the chemo, the radiation. It's a never-ending struggle. But think of the flip side of that obituary for a moment. Dave went into hospice care and gave up, and he died. Who wants that in the obituary? Maybe they should say Dave accepted his upcoming death and went into hospice care and spent his last days with his family instead. But that long, courageous, lingering battle with cancer, how often do we see that along there? The other roadblock I have found is our medical community. If you're a doctor, what's your role? Keep people alive, save people, cure people. If you have somebody dies and they're your patient, what are you? Oh, you're a failure. You're darn right you're a failure. And so the medical community has a hard time saying, you know, it's kind of a line to walk here. My father-in-law, he ended up in the hospital trying to diagnose his stage 4 kidney cancer better. And a hospitalist came in and said, Russ, you've got stage 4 kidney cancer. I'll never forget the next line. He says, the horse is already out of the barn. There's nothing more we can do. Get your affairs in order. Go see your son graduate or grandson graduate in Texas, and you don't have long. He leaves. Half hour later, the oncologist walks in. Russ, you got stage 4 kidney cancer. There's this trial I can get you in. And so all of a sudden, he's getting mixed messages. You know, what do I do? One doctor friend of mine told me, he says, you know, there's always something more we can do. The question you got to ask yourself is, do you want to have that done? And what kind of quantity of life is that going to result in? It's not quality of life, it's quantity of life. That's stuck with me. There's always something more that we can do. So and also doctors in the medical community as a whole have difficulty just talking about death, just like anybody else here. You know, it's not something in dealing with feelings and, you know, those kinds of things. It's difficult. I'm a preceptor at Michigan State Medical School. They've really taken a turn. There's a class where they film students talking to simulated patients. And rather than just saying, what about your knee, pain in your knee or your headache or whatever, they talk about what's your family situation like? What's your support system like? What are you feeling today? You know, how are you feeling with all this? And it's wonderful because you're casting a whole net. You're dealing with the whole patient, which is really what hospice is all about. Hospice, how many people here have had an experience with hospice? Raise your hand, please. Wow. How many people would say that was a relatively positive experience, which is a common thing? Hospice is an attitude, not a place. A lot of people think it's just a place. And I can say where the hospice office is, or I can say there's an inpatient place here called Trillium Woods where you can go if you don't have family members to take care of you. But 90% of people still die at home. Hospice seeks comfort rather than cure. Hospice serves as a guide. You know, if I want to know what it's like to give birth, I can go ask a mother. If I want to know what it's like for me to die, I'm kind of up a creek unless your name is Lazarus, okay? But hospice deals with death all the time, and they can say, I can't predict exactly the time of when this person's going to die, but here are the stages that you're going to go through. And we can pretty much predict, and here's what some things that you're going to see along the way. When my friend Phil was dying, I'll never forget the nurse coming into the room and said, you know, do you know what the last sense, all the senses don't go at one time. She said, do you know what the last sense to go is? Hearing. Hearing. And she said, please don't talk to him about him when you're in the room like he's not here because he can hear you. And number two, please talk to him because he can hear you. Let him know he's not alone. Let him know that if you're feeling like you want to tell him some things, you know he's unconscious. He'll be able to hear you. And the other thing I'll never forget that she said is she said, you know, what Phil, like a lot of people when they are dying, their trachea closes and the air comes out at a high rate of speed. It's commonly known as a death rattle. And it's not a very pleasant sound to hear. And I remember saying, oh, you do something to help him. He's in pain. And she very calmly said, he's not in any kind of pain. This is very common. It's involuntary muscle reaction going on here. He's okay. And what a comfort to know that he was okay and not in any kind of pain. So hospice can serve as a guide too. And that's really important to know that. And as I said earlier, hospice, it's a no-brainer to be at home, costs hundreds of dollars a day. To be at a hospital is $1,000 a day. So riders on everybody's insurance policy has hospice because the insurance company says this is saving us money, you know, to have this. And so those are some things about hospice. I used to give a lot of hospice talks or individuals. I get calls all the time. I have 2 roles. I've got my official hospice role I've been doing for 27 years, and then I have my unofficial hospice role. People know I get calls. Dave, my mom has just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. We don't know what to do. Can you help us? Dave, my sister is dying. She's in absolute denial that she's dying. Can you help us? And so I end up being involved in families as friends and friends of people, because to get them to serve, I kind of serve as a guide between that initial encounter and getting them into hospice care if that's something that they choose. I'm also a facilitator for Making Choices Michigan, which has to do with advanced care planning. And so much of what I do when I have a conversation with somebody might say to me, Dave, I don't want to be a vegetable. What's the next word out of my mouth? Why? But also, what do you mean by vegetable? I don't want to be a burden to my family. Help me understand. What is a burden to you? I go back to my first time I was looking at a house to buy. And I said to the real estate agent, hey, I want a fixer-upper. He said, stop right there. I said, what? He said, for some people, a fixer-upper is painting a wall. For other people, it's knocking down a wall. Which kind of person are you? And how true that is. We throw these terms out there all the time, and what they mean to me might be different what they mean to you. Let's clarify. Let's take a step back and clarify. So I'm constantly saying, what do you mean by being a burden? You want to die a good death. What does that mean to you? Speaking of good deaths, what would be, other than dying in your sleep, dying quickly, dying after hitting a hole-in-one on the golf course, what would be your definition of a good death? Yes, sir? Driving the bus, but you can't die quickly. I said that that's not one of the things. What would be your, you hear this term all the time. He or she died a good death. What does that mean to you? Having enough time to say goodbye. That's, for some people think, oh, I just want to die, but having that time. Yes. Yes. Do the things that you want to. This person here was talking about, I want to check things off my list. What else? Oh. Okay, going to sleep with your family around you. Some people have said to me, I don't want my family here. I'm still pissed at my brother from 25 years ago. I don't want him in the room, you know. I've had that. I know that sounds crazy, but that's some of the things. What else would be your definition of a good death? Yes? Okay, all right. Be a nice spot. Anything else? Yes? Painless. Now, this is a great opportunity. Thank you, Lauren. What do you mean by painless? Are we talking physical pain or emotional pain? Physical pain.
That all your remaining mental capacities can be focused on the family members or with nothing in your life, rather than focusing, your brain's all focusing on how much pain that you're in physically.
Okay. And hospice can do a wonderful job controlling physical pain if they have enough lead time. The qualifications for hospice, in case you don't know, you have to have 2 doctors say you have 6 months expected life expectancy. Doesn't mean you're going to die in 6 months, but that's to get you into hospice. But so many people wait until the end. My nephew, his father was dying. And I said to him, have you thought about hospice? He goes, no. I said, why? He goes, well, hospice is only for the last week of life. That was his mindset. And once again, hospice can, if you can get in sooner, they can deal with that. All right, thank you, Lauren. Anything else? Let's go with emotional pain. A lot of people think physical pain, emotional pain. Think of the regrets we all carry around our lives. Think of the anger that sometimes we carry around our lives. And that causes emotional pain. And to have those things get off your chest is a huge difference. I've had people tell me all kinds of stuff in their lives that they would never have told anybody else who's they're related to, because there's that friction, there's those old relationships go back 30, 40 years. I'm a safe person. And it's important for people say, I just got to tell somebody about this. And you're the person. And please don't tell anybody. I just got to tell you. It's been on my chest for 30 years. I just got to say. And I encourage people to write letters to people. You know, if they can't physically talk to them or can't emotionally talk to them, write a letter to them if you want to try to mend a relationship. But I have discovered people die as they have lived. If you're an angry person for most of your life, you're going to die an angry person, okay? It's not going to have this miraculous transformation in the last couple of weeks of your life. You can take steps along that way. Tuesdays with Maury. How many people have read it? It's a great book, isn't it? I strongly recommend you read that one too. Just a tiny little book, but it has a whole lot of wisdom. And I used to teach this in class. And how can we be more like Maury? Maury was dying. He accepted it. He had a great attitude on life. You know, Mitch was saying to him, you know, Maury said, "You come see me at the cemetery. We'll talk." And Mitch goes, well, Maury, you're going to be dead. He says, "You darn right I'm going to be dead. You talk, I'll listen." You know, and Mitch, he had a memorial service while he was still alive, and Mitch said, "You know, I'm sorry I missed your memorial service." He says, "Don't worry, you can make the next one." But death was an everyday fact of life. This is an excerpt from his book. That's what we're all looking for, a certain peace with the idea of dying. If we know in the end we can ultimately have that peace with dying, then we can finally do really hard thing which makes peace with living. It's natural to die. The fact that we make such a big hullabaloo over it is because we don't see ourselves as part of nature. We think because we're human, we're something above nature. We are not. Everything that gets born dies. And here's the payoff. Here's how we know we're different from all those wonderful plants and animals. As long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without ever really going away. All the love you've created is still there. All the memories are still there. You live on in the hearts of everyone you have touched and nurtured while you were there. You know, we think of all these memorials that we have to have in gravestones that we're going to live on. It's living on in our actions that are with everybody here. Anything else about a good death? Yes? Okay. Okay. People. Thank you for bringing that up. Religious beliefs are important to so many people. My dad having the last rites with Father John. And the belief in the afterlife that so many people have, that's a huge comfort. Whether it exists or not, I don't know. But I know for that particular person I'm talking to, it's a comfort for them, and that's important. So do that. My father-in-law said, "Let's go downstairs." He said, "Dave," he said, "here's the water shut off. Here's the circuit box. Here's the gas shut off. Here's where my tax records are. Here's my lawyer and tax accountant's phone number." He was a very pragmatic guy. He knew his wife was clueless on this stuff, and she was. Trust me. Trust me. And the fact that I knew this gave him a sense of peace. I could just see it go, just relax completely after he told me that. Now, and guys are very pragmatic. They're very, what should we say, objective. My mother, on the other hand, gets involved in the minutia of things. She's 101, so we talk about her funeral quite a bit, and she's always thinking about it, and it's a common occurrence at our house. In fact, if you hear my phone buzz while I'm up here, it's my mom calling. She lives in her own house where she's lived for the last 40 years, and she wants to stay there. I said, part of the deal is, Mom, you got to call me twice a day and let me know you're alive. So lots of times I don't answer the phone. I just see it's her. And she'll leave me a message. "Dave, I'm alive for 8 more hours. Bye." That's the deal we made. So my mom, we're talking about her funeral. We get into the pallbearers. And she says, "I got 5 male grandchildren." That's big to be a pallbearer. You got to be a male. "But I don't know what to do with that 6th spot." And I said, "Mom, you got a great-grandson." He is so scrawny. He's only 14 years old. He couldn't carry a part of the casket. I said, "Mom, just hang in there a couple more years. He's growing every day." And today, Brandon is now 18 years old, and I think he's part of the team. I think he's made the cut. So all these things have to do with a good death. But the point I guess I want to make in my stories is what's important for you might be not important for you, but this is what's important to me. It just, you know. And part of this thing with good death is like my father-in-law saying, you know, here are the things. My dad saying, "I want to die at home," and we had hospice come in, is to have some kind of plan in place. To think about this stuff ahead of time, realizing that you do have choices. And part of that is filling out an advanced care plan. Number one, I have a patient advocate who knows my wishes, is going to look at, no, I know they can make a decision, and they're going to carry it out. A lot of people say, I want my son or daughter to be my patient advocate. Well, lots of times sons and daughters are very emotionally tied to you, and they have trouble making these decisions. You want somebody who's going to make a decision. And one guy, a friend of mine, says, my brother was the patient advocate. When it came time to make a decision about my dad, he says, I can't do this. We're going to have a family vote. Wrong thing to do. You know, the family didn't vote all the same way. They went 50-50, and they're still ticked off at each other as a result of that. Some people want to kill Dad. Other people didn't want to follow Dad's wishes and all that kind of stuff. So to have a conversation with your patient advocate so they know, because you can't predict every single situation. But if I know my patient advocate knows my wishes, I know they're going to carry them out. Hand went up. A friend of mine she says, my dad just called me the other night, and he said, Kathy, you're my patient advocate. Goodbye. And she called him right back up and said, Dad, if I'm going to be your patient advocate, we're going to have a talk. No, it's all set. It's okay. I got it written down. No, we're going to have a conversation. So she really forced him into it. And so often, the exact opposite happens. I have people tell me they want to have a conversation with their kids, but the kids don't want to have it. So I go in the next room and talk to the kids. I said, there's some serious stuff going on here with your parents. Would you like to hear what they want to talk to you? Oh, no, we can't have that conversation. Why? Well, he might get upset. He might get depressed. My goodness, he might start crying. I always say that's why they invented Kleenex. It's okay to cry. We're set. I got a box right here. So, but also with the advanced care plan is make some decisions. If I'm in a neurological situation like Karen Quinlan, and I'm a vegetable state, what do you want to have happen? Do you want to have this go on forever? Do you want to go on for a little bit? Do you want to end right away? And put that in writing. Because if it's not in writing, and if it's not witnessed, and it's not signed, it's not going to do any good. Now, a couple of things I've come across with, as I said earlier, Making Choices Michigan is an organization in town, makingchoices.org, makingchoicesmichigan.org, and they will have an advanced care plan interview with you for free. Because they realize for some people it's completely overwhelming. I'll come to your home or another volunteer, and we'll talk about your wishes, talk about your experiences with death. Who are you thinking about for a healthcare advocate? And then we have a talk with the healthcare advocate. You know what you're getting yourself into. Here's what you're supposed to do. And it's a wonderful thing. I've done about 5 of these so far. I just got trained, and people just, once again, they come up with, I don't want to be a burden to my family. What do you mean by burden? Let's talk about that for a second. So that's one thing. The other thing I've come across is 5 wishes, which has the basic thing, DNRs and a patient advocate, but then they go further. They say, here's who I want to be at my house during my last hours. I want somebody to come in and give me a massage. I want Motown music being played. I want to be cremated, not buried. I want to have so-and-so give the eulogy at my funeral. And so often, the early things, they would have lines that you could write on. And now the more recent advanced care plans have little boxes you can check. You can cross these things out, or you can write specific directions too. The neat thing about these is that you can change them. If you don't, your situation right now, you're feeling pretty good. You have some certain wishes. You get older. You have life events happen to you. People die. People get divorced. Whatever the case may be. I was giving this talk once, and a hand goes up. She says, "Oh my gosh," she says, "Dave, I just realized my patient advocate died 5 years ago." And so often, because we are in that checklist society, you think, okay, I did this. I'm done with it. I'm going to stick it somewhere, and I don't have to deal with it again. It's a process. You got to constantly deal with it all the time. Person said to me, my dad died, and he left us nothing. And at this point, the tears are starting to come down her cheeks. And she said, we had to make some decisions. And a week later, we're cleaning out his stuff. We found a shoebox that had a 5-page document with everything that it wanted. She says, the really stickler thing about this that's really causing me to cry today, we did everything the opposite of what he wanted. He wanted to have a cremation. We buried him. He wanted to have a small service, just a family at somebody's house. We had this big blowout church service. And he says, I feel terrible. Well, what are you supposed to do? He didn't know. Another person said, I tried to have this talk with my dad, and Dad cut me off. He said, my best friend for 60 years is the funeral home director in town. He knows everything. Dad dies. They go knock on the door of the funeral director. He says, well, your dad was right. We've been friends for 60 years. We never talked about this. But it was once again a way of avoiding that talk. Another lady says, you know, I'm a slob. My house is a pigsty. I know this. I put everything in my, something I affectionately call the envelope, including my dog's medications. And I stuck it in the trunk of my car, and I told my kids, that's where it is. You'll be able to find it there. And then she ends by saying, I hope I never get rear-ended. When I think of all, I always tell people, think about all the deaths that you have seen in your lifetime. And for me, that quickly becomes a fork in the road. On one side of the fork are all the deaths that I say to myself, that was really cool the way the family that handled that, the way the patient handled that. And I'll ask them, I said, what did you do to get to that point? And the other side of the fork were some deaths that weren't very pleasant. And I said, boy, I sure don't want that for me. I'm going to take some active steps to avoid that. After you get that fork and you figure out what it is that you do want, and there's no right or wrong. I want to go back and say that over and over again. If you want to have everything done to you the day you die, that's fine. But realize that you have a choice, and that you don't have to follow that path if you don't want to. Discuss it with people, write it down, and then after it's written down, distribute it. Making choices, Michigan calls it, discuss, distribute, and document are the three things that they say with D's to keep it simple for people. And once again, it's important to give it to as many people as possible. My mom has hers by the phone. It's right there on a big yellow sheet of paper in case somebody happens to come in the house, we're not there. My document, my lawyer's got it, my friends have got it, my family members. I emailed it to each of my kids. I scanned it, and I emailed so they can access it by email if they want to. A friend of mine keeps it a flash drive on his keychain, and it's labeled My Advanced Care Plan. And then you can do the extra step is you can download it to a place called Great Health Connect. You can't do it, but your doctor can, or Making Choices Michigan can. And if I'm up in Traverse City and get in a car accident, they can just go to this, download it, and they have the information there. You know, no family members there, or you don't carry it around in your purse or things like that. A lot of you are saying to yourself, you know, I'm young. I don't need an advanced care plan. Well, once again, terminal illness isn't the only thing. There's the events, and you can't predict events. There's rotten weather out there. You get a car accident today, and you could be in a situation where you're on life support. So I always say, anybody who's over 18, you should have something written down. You should be at least thinking about it. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, people come out of those situations, they are just ticked. They're ticked that their wishes were not followed. And you can't predict every situation. In fact, we just made the decision this week. We said, Mom, you go to the hairdresser with somebody, you got to carry that. Put that in your purse. It's got to stay in your purse because we can't do everything. Yeah, they have to legally, otherwise they're in trouble. They're liable for suit. Thank you for sharing that. Yes?
Even with the proper DNR that's been executed properly and the hospital has it in the record, and the whole team knows about it, the hospital will not always honor that.
There's been stories about that, and that's why you need to have a really definitive conversation with your patient advocate, and they have to be a person who's going to create waves. They have to be strong. They're going to create waves. And they're going to not stop with just once being said no. Yeah, because you do have people who have strong beliefs, whether they're based on religious or other things, that say, no, I got my job here is to keep them alive. Well, no, it says right here they don't want to be kept alive. You know, and you may say at the threaten a lawsuit or something. I mean, to do that. Any other questions, comments so far? Yes? Yeah, And it's interesting you say that because one time a person said to me, she says, I don't care what I have for my funeral. I don't want a funeral. I'm not going to be there. And I said to her, well, that's true, but think that now your children have to make some decisions that they weren't counting on making in their time of grief. And so I realize it sounds like you're saving them some time and trouble and money, but we need to grieve. Human beings, we need to grieve things. I mean, there's so much unresolved grief as it is. So to have that opportunity, a friend of mine called me up and said, Dave, she says, my mom doesn't want to have anything. We got to do something. And I said, why don't you have a family dinner, get out the photo albums, and talk about your mom? And that's what they did. That was their kind of their mini service along that fact. Yes?
We had talked about those who are dying and their wishes and them, but how do you handle the family members that are sitting there saying, I want you to live, you have this DNR, I don't care. You know, how do you handle that and say, well, this is their wishes, you need to follow it, but you have your family members that are like, you know, you're my life, especially with parents, it's really hard to let go. I mean, do you work a lot with
Yes. Ideally, while your parents are still with it, you invite them to have a conversation with the other family members. I'm going to be filling out this advanced care plan. I want you all to hear what I want and why I'm doing it this way. And so you can bring that back into the conversation because death, end of life is very emotionally charged. And your instinct is, we got to keep mom and dad alive. I'm a terrible son or daughter if I don't do that. And so I always bottom line is I have a conversation with this person, and I keep saying, what is it that are you acting the way that you are? Well, I got to keep mom and dad alive. I want to be a good son. But do you know what they said earlier? Well, yeah. And then when you start getting little cracks in the wall, and eventually, hopefully, not all the time, you break through. Any other thoughts or comments? One more thing about good death. If you were born in the Catholic faith and you were married in the Catholic faith, you had this song sung at your wedding, and you darn well want it sung at your funeral. Ave Maria. At this point, my daughter, if she were here, she said, Dad, who sings that? And I said, well, Julio Iglesias. He goes, let's keep it that way. She never misses the opportunity to let me know I can't sing. But another aunt of mine, I said, Vera, are you an Ave Maria girl? She says, you bet. She says, I have it written right down here. In fact, I want that sung at my funeral. So those are all important things. I want to back up a second to tell you a little bit about my history with hospice. I got involved in hospice because my best friend, Phil Schichtel, had lung cancer back in 1985 and 86. And he quickly went downhill. And at the time, I remember very vividly going over to his house that day to have a conversation to talk about some things that we had just been avoiding talking. And at that particular day, the cancer had gone to his brain, and his wife met me at the door and says, we're going to the hospital. And he ended up in the hospital, and I remember his wife spent 2 nights with him in the hospital. And if you've ever been in a hospital, you get great care, but you don't get very good sleep. And everybody was pretty fried at the end of 2 days who was involved in that. And I remember being in the waiting room with his family, and the hospice nurse comes in and says, have you ever heard of hospice? And this was back in 1986, and we said, no, what's hospice? And she explained it to us, and we said, why would we not do this? And Phil was able to come home for the last 2 days of his life. And at the time, I said to myself, you know, I did everything in my power that I knew to help Phil and his family, but I felt so inadequate. I felt so unprepared. I said, I know death is going to come knocking at my door again, and I'm the kind of person that's going to want to help. And so I said, I want to volunteer for hospice. That's how I got involved. And so hospice makes you wait a year after a significant death in your life. So I walked in a year to the volunteer coordinator's office, and she promptly gets up and locks the door. And I go, what's going on? And she goes, well, we don't get many guys here. I want to make sure you don't get away. So I went through hospice training, and my very first patient, they get a little sheet of paper. It says, this man has been bedridden for 5 years. His wife has never left his side, and that particular day, she's going to go look at caskets with a social worker. And so I show up at the door, and the social worker says, you know, are you good to go? I said, hey, I'm trained. Put me on the field. I'm ready to go. And they leave. And all of a sudden, like 5 minutes later, you know, he was unconscious, but his breathing was very steady. His breathing gets very irregular and gets very shallow. And so I remember my hospice training. I take his hand. I said, my name is Dave. I'm from hospice. Your wife's not here, but I'm here. You're not alone. It's okay. And his breathing is getting shallower and more irregular. Now, I don't know about you. My concept of the moment of death is based on Saturday morning Westerns. You think about this for a minute. The cowboy's been shot. His hat's kind of askew. He's got his scarf here, and he says, tell Betty Lou I... Well, I have to tell you, it doesn't happen that way, okay? His breathing got shallower and more irregular. Even though I've been trained, there's a part of me that wants to call 911, and there's a little sticker by the phone that hospice puts there that says, don't call 911, call hospice. They know you're going to try to do that. And so I called and said, I think my patient has died. I'm not clear. Could you come out? The nurse comes out, and he indeed was dead. And I learned some, and she takes me aside afterwards, and she says, Dave, she was really worried that I was never going to volunteer again. She says, most patients don't die the first time you're there, 20 minutes after you get there. Are you okay with this? I said, you bet. This was a really important thing for me to experience. I realized, number one, how people do die for the most part, and number two, you can't tell me that he didn't pick his time. He didn't wait until his wife left the house. I hear this story over and over and over again. And it's a common thing. After a presentation, a woman comes up to me. And before she even gets to me, I mean, there's just buckets coming off her. And she said, my dad, when he was dying, he said to me, I was the only one in the house. He said, honey, would you walk down to the grocery store a couple blocks away and get some lifesavers? And she goes, Dad, I can't do that. I'm the only one here. You're near death. He goes, if you love me, you go do that. She goes, well, you know what happened. She comes back, he's dead. And she says, it's just been terrible that I've been living with this. I wasn't there when he died. But hearing your talk today, I realized that he picked that time to protect me. He didn't want me there. So often it's the guy parent protecting that they have to protect their kids. And that was another story I hear over and over again. And one time, a friend of mine called me up and said, Dave, my dad is still going on. The doctor said he should have died 2 weeks ago, and he's still here. Nobody can figure it out. And I said, have you ever talked about giving him permission to die? And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, some people think they got to stick around, that they've been the protector all their lives, and they have a hard time letting go of that. I said, tell him he did a great job as a father. You are mature, responsible adults. You're going to do fine. You're going to take care of mom. You're always going to remember him. You're going to bring him up at the family parties. He's never going to die in that sense. So they went in and told him that, and 2 hours later he dies. People sometimes need to be given permission. My dad gave himself permission, if you remember earlier in my stories. This person needed somebody to give him permission to do that. And I heard another story. A friend of mine was on the opposite side of the coin. Their 10-year-old daughter would not die. She had terminal cancer, and once again, she should have been dead a few weeks earlier, and they had a conversation with her. Well, come to find out, she thought that her parents were going to be very sad when she died, and so she was trying to hang on for as long as they could. They mustered all the courage they had and told her that yes, they were going to be sad, it was going to be okay, it was okay for her to go, and she died a couple hours later herself. So, these conversations are tough, but you're not gaining anything by avoiding them. You think, oh, I'm avoiding some kind of pain, inner pain in myself, but you're going to carry around that pain for a long time. To have those conversations, that relief that it gives people, and as you can see that you're enabling that to happen, it's huge. Sometimes picking your time, there's some things that happen that I just can't explain. I had a patient one time. I went to the house. He was unconscious, had been unconscious all week. His wife was going to go grocery shopping. And I said, well, tell me about your patient. I had my book. I thought I was just going to be reading while he was gone. And she says, well, he likes 50s music. And I said, do you have some 50s music we could put on? And so she said, yeah. So he had the big screen TV with the lyrics come on and everything. And she leaves. And I take his hand. I said, I'm Dave from hospice and everything, and I didn't get a response. And you're not alone. It's okay. Your wife's going to be back soon. And Buddy Holly comes on. I happen to like Buddy Holly. And Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue. And I kind of involuntarily squeezed his hand to the beat. I got to squeeze back. And I said, whoa. Is that just by mistake or just by chance? I guess there's only one way to find out. And I squeeze again. Got to squeeze back. And I said, you know, my daughter's not around. Do-wop-a-da, Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue. And, you know, and he's going along with me. And about a half hour later, you know, I said, I'm getting a cramp. I got to take a break here. And about 5 minutes, the hand comes up. And we start squeezing again to more 50s music. His wife comes home. Hand goes down. I leave. He dies that night. I can't explain it. I don't know why. But I've learned I never walk into a patient's home thinking that I'm just going to read a book and be a babysitter, because there's unlimited things that could go on there. Has anybody here ever been to a death cafe? No? Has anybody heard of it? Oh, you learned 3 things today then. Okay, Death Cafe. Somebody emailed me an article in USA Today. And deathcafe.org is a organization where people basically sit around and talk about death. And I saw that, you can go on their website and you can see where they are. And there was one in Ann Arbor in a week. So I said, hey, I'm going to go down there and check it out. And we were met in a restaurant. Usually we met in coffee houses, restaurants, whatever. It's free. The facilitators don't charge anything. And they started off by saying, what brings you here today? And people started talking about what brings them here today. We happen to have a person from ALS, suffering with ALS at our table, so he was able to give some real personal insight to what was going on in his life. 2 hours later, it was done. And we could have gone 4 hours. It was magical. So when I came back home, I said, I want to facilitate some of these. So I've done some of them since then. They're very cool if you get a chance. A couple things. You ask questions like, does knowing that you're going to die, how does that affect how you're going to live? Think about it. As human beings, we're the only ones that know that we're going to die. And that's really scary for people. There's a great book out there called Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. It says our whole lives are driven by this fear of death. You know, what kind of experiences have you had with death in your life? Let's talk about them. What did you learn from those experiences? What do you want to take away from those experiences? And then you talk about, you know, if you were to have a memorial service, what would you want for that memorial service? Who would you want to talk about everything? I've happened to give a eulogy 5 times now in my life. And you think, oh, God, that's terrible. But it's what a relief, what a sense of release to be able to talk about the person that you love to the whole world. And if you ever get a chance, I strongly recommend that you do it. It's just a whole sense of calm comes down on you, thing like that. So, Death Cafe, once again, taking death, which has been over here, and putting it back into the room. Not avoiding it, let's talk about it, and that's huge. So if that's one thing. The other thing I do for hospice these days is I do life stories. I go in and interview somebody and take notes, and I turn their life into a little bit of a story. And most people say, my first patient, she said, I don't have anything to say to you. I didn't have much of a life. She was thinking, I didn't save anybody's life. I wasn't president of the United States. So I said, let's just start here. Let's talk about this for a minute. I'll ask you some questions. You don't have to, if you don't want to stop, you can just say, I'm done. 2 hours later, her voice was so hoarse she couldn't talk anymore. And she said, you know, she ended up by saying, I guess I did have a lot to say. I did have a lot of things going on in my life. And what a freeing thing to be able to review your life and realize that we all have meaning. We've all had interactions in our lives with people. We don't live as islands. And to relive those things, and sometimes they're back here, and to bring them to the forefront. Before I close, it's always important for me to get your thoughts on today, your reflections. You walked in here at 1 o'clock thinking this was going to be a certain way. You're hoping maybe there's going to be a PowerPoint or something. I don't know. The tech person always comes up to me and says, what do you want, a computer? You got a PowerPoint? I says, I'm tech-free. I tell stories. Their mouth kind of dropped. Well, I'm kind of disappointed about that. But you're never going to hurt my feelings. Tell me your thoughts on today. What did you think today was going to be like, and how did it turn out to be? Yes, sir. And did that surprise you? No? Okay, and not this terrible calamity that's befalling you. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir. You know, I think Kevorkian brought the conversation to the table, and as a result of that, we have some laws like Oregon, where this young lady took her life. My belief is, if I'm in a situation like that, I'm going to use hospice, and I'm probably going to be in a situation where I don't need that. But I think he brought important things. Some people are in incurable diseases that go on and on and on, and they're in pain, and I can see their point of view where they'd want to end their life. Yeah, I always think that a lot of people think I gotta be either this or that, and to me, hospice is in the middle, and that plays a big role. And once again, people don't necessarily know all about what they could know about hospice. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other thoughts or comments about today? Yes? Boy, if I could answer that, I'd be a millionaire. I don't know, but I definitely know the mind, the body, and the spirit, they're all connected. I've seen too many examples. I've talked to too many colleagues. It happens all the time. I can't explain it. I can only give my mom, who's 101, she's just got this optimism. She says, let's plant bulbs this fall. They'll be here next spring. I mean, that's her mindset, And so I can't answer that. But I want to know. I want to have it. Anybody else? Any comments? Yes, ma'am.
I know for me, having been involved in several family deaths and watching people that I love slip away from life has helped me accept it more as a process of life. And I was wondering if that was true for you.
Oh, yes. I have no fear of death at all whatsoever. And that's been really helped me be a better hospice worker, because when somebody brings up something, I don't get emotionally traumatized by it. A lot of people, I have a niece, at the moment she talks about her father dying, she just bursts into tears. It's been 2 years now. I mean, she just has to work through that part. That's why you don't volunteer for hospice till after a year. Yes, I've learned so much more. People say, how can you do this working with dying people? I said, I learned so much about myself, about other people, and I realize I'm helping. We're all going to be there. As one person, she says, I'll check the statistics, but last night, as far as I know, 100% of people die. I could check it again. It might be different today. Any other comments? Yes? Uh-huh. It is hard to do. And the thing that sticks with me, as it was explained to me in front of a young girl, is that she's going to have to process this in different stages in her life. Psychology, there's different stages. And you have to be able to process it now. You have to process it when she has the father-daughter dance in grade school. She's going to have to process it again when she gets married, because all these moments in her life now are missing. And so it's not one of these things you check off and say, it's done. You got to keep on going. It's a process with that. So the bottom line is, use factual terms as much as possible. Don't say, your mommy went to sleep, because they're not going to be sleeping then for a while. And number 2, God loved mommy so much that he wanted to take her home. Well, I'm still here. Does that mean that God doesn't love me? I mean, kids, these thoughts go through their minds. You got to be careful what you say. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other things? Yes?
You talked about how we deal with preparing for death.
Yes.
How do we deal with what happens after a loved one dies?
Well, every hospice has a bereavement department. And by law, they're supposed to offer that. And they'll take that on for 13 months as a bereavement, either individually or in group. 13 months to get by that 1-year anniversary. How many people here has said, it's been too much time now, get over it? We're a time-oriented society. So number 1, take advantage of some resources offered to you. Number 2, don't avoid it. My sister took her own life when she was 32. And for a while, we didn't mention her at all. We were just too sad or whatever. And my dad brought her into the conversation like only he could, telling a humorous story. And then we made a memorial at Catholic Central in her name, a scholarship fund. And somebody now, whoever gets that scholarship fund, contacts my mom. She's part of the life. She was here. She doesn't like she didn't exist. Don't avoid it. Taking grief is like putting a beach ball in water and trying to sit on it, put it down, and it's not going to work. Sooner or later, it's going to pop up, and it's going to pop up with a lot of vengeance. And lots of times, a current death will bring back memories of unresolved grief from a prior one. So now you're not only dealing with this one, you're dealing with the 5 ones you didn't grieve before. Is that helpful? Good, thank you. Anybody else? Yes? Well, you can register with the state on your driver's license to be an organ donor. Yeah. I know, it doesn't, well, I guess it depends how strong you want to fight it. You can put that down in your advanced care plan if that's what you want. You can pick somebody to be your patient advocate who's not a member of your family, who's going to follow through on your wishes, and whether that's going to cause a friction or not that you want to try to avoid or not avoid, it's up to you, but that's how you can do it. Yes? I made my first advanced care plan when we went on a trip when our kids were young. Interesting story, my wife says, we need to take separate plane flights. And I said, why? She says, well, if the plane goes down, there'll be one of us left. And I said, let's go talk to our neighbor. They got 4 kids under the age of 6. I said, Ed, do you guys take separate flights? He says, hell no, none of us wants to be the one left behind. Yes?
You said that it's easier as you do each person. What was the first kid in hospice like?
I have not dealt with children in hospice for myself. I've had friends that I've involved with unofficially, helping them, but they're just all matter of fact. I mean, there's not too much hiding it. People say, well, we're not going to let them know that they're dying. Oh, for the parents, it's hard. But once again, to go back to what you were saying, don't ignore it. Don't try to avoid it. Let's face it head on. Let's talk about it because they know they're dying. And you know they're dying, so it's not the elephant in the room. I'm running out of time. I want to close with something here. A few years ago, I started doing this presentation, and people said to me, I wish my cousin would have heard this. I wish my neighbor would have heard this. Can you got some notes or something? So I said, well, I can put something together, and the notes turned into a little book. It's called I'm Dying to Talk with You, 25 Years of End-of-Life Conversations. And it's not much of a book. But here's what I've discovered. Here's the feedback that I get. The feedback is, so-and-so, I read it one night. I gave it to my next-door neighbor. My next-door neighbor gave it to her aunt. Her aunt gave it to her brother. We all have people dying. So it's meant to be a resource. If anybody is interested, I have them for sale up here. They're $10. It's also for sale at Schuler's or on my Amazon.com. The number one comment I hear from people about today, somebody said, we talked about death and we laughed. I didn't think that was ever going to happen in my lifetime. And I feel so comfortable now. I feel I can go home. I got some tools that you gave me. I can have a conversation with somebody about this and not get broken up about it or not get angry or whatever the case may be. Despite the fact that I'm a strong advocate of hospice and will use it myself when my time comes, my goal in writing this book is not to get you to use hospice. My goal is to help you see that you have choices when it comes to end-of-life care and to encourage you to consider these choices rather than blindly follow a path that you might not want to be on. I have seen where that path leads, and I don't wish that upon anybody. Regardless of what your wishes are for your own end-of-life care, chances are you'll be called upon to play a role and make some decisions for other people as a patient advocate. Even if you don't want to think about your own end of life, you probably aren't going to escape having to think about somebody else's end of life. I think back to my friend Phil and how the uncertainty and fear we faced together with his terminal diagnosis was replaced by a sense of calmness and an attitude of preparation through the help of many, many people. That is my hope for you. When the knock sounds on your door, I hope you answer it both for yourself and for others. Frank, thanks so much for having me today. I will be more than glad glad to stay around here and talk individually to anybody that wants to talk until there's nobody left.
Thank you, David. Just want to remind those of you that are here and to share with those that aren't here a few things. One is that this will be online. The video will be available. You can find it through the psychology department early next week, probably grcc.edu/psychology. All of the presentations that have been done over the last 6 years are there, and so they're all about this length. They vary in topic. The next 2 topics that are coming up will be next semester, one in February, one in March. The one in February is on art therapy. We'll have a practicing therapist who uses art therapy to come and talk about the applications of art therapy, a very growing field in our discipline. And then the last one will be by Dr. Carol Tavris. She's a co-author of the book, Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me. Those of you who are intro psych students may notice Dr. Tavris' name. She is the co-author of the textbook we use as well. So we're really pleased to be able to have truly a national speaker come in the area of psychology. So again, give our speaker a round of applause, and I thank you for all being here.
And I forgot to mention, if anybody is interested in the 5 wishes, you can download them for $1 from Aging with Dignity, or I have them up here for $1 too. That's what they cost me. If you want an advanced care plan conversation, I have a card to fill out, and somebody will come contact you.
That was really great.
Thank you.
And I'm going to give you $1 for one of these 5 wishes.
Turn that off.
Yeah.